Hi there, crafty friends. Thanks for tuning into my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Michelle, and I'm going to walk you through how I made a wreath attachment and how I attached it to the wreath and finished off the wreath. So first we're starting off with these ice skates. I had found these from the Target dollar spot maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm just removing the shoelaces here so we can paint. So I'm using an embossed paint technique that I learned from Summer of Hammond's Nest. You can go to her blog, hammondsnest.com, and she has a post there on how to achieve this embossed look. So I used joint compound and acrylic paint. I just mixed a little bit of the joint compound into my paint, and I gave the ice skates one coat. So you see me here working on the second ice skate. And what you need besides the joint compound and the paint, you need an embossed paper, and I got this embossed paper from the paper section in Hobby Lobby. It's just a very pretty pattern that you will imprint onto your surface. So I'm a little bit out of frame here, but I'm just finishing up my coat of the mixture. Then I used the embossed paper to imprint the pattern onto the skate. So I had just cut a piece of the paper and I imprint it and then move it over to the next part of the skate. So you can see that it leaves behind the pretty pattern on your surface. And here I'm just taking a little toothpick and I'm cleaning out the holes where the shoelace will go back in. So once everything was dried, I just went in with my sander and gave the skates a light sanding. Then I used the same acrylic paint and I diluted it with some water. Here I am just mixing up that diluted paint. And with this, I give the skates one coat. So it's just like a paint wash that you add, and it kind of just evens everything out. Once that dries, then I use some antiquing wax from Folk Art and this soft brush, and I just added a little bit of wax to the edge of my skates just to give it a little bit of interest, a little bit of dimension, and I just go all the way around the skate. I use a damp paper towel just to wipe back some of the excess wax, and I just go all the way around, achieving the look that I want. I've added the shoelaces back onto the skate, and I'm just tying the jute into like a little shoestring bow, and I want to add a rusty bell to the laces. So I just put a little piece of masking tape on the end of the jute rope and I strung it through the jute rope, and I'm just going to tie a knot to secure it onto the skate. So to continue with that rusty theme, I used some Mod Podge and some ground cinnamon to add a faux rust look onto the blades of the skate. So I just painted on some, or brushed on some Mod Podge onto the blade and then added the cinnamon. And this is just a fun and easy technique to use for that rusty look. So here I'm just shaking off the excess, and with a clean brush I just brush off any excess that's still remaining on the skate. So once I finished this, I did take the skates outside and I sprayed them with a Rust-Oleum 2X clear coat and let them dry. So here I'm going to add the skates to this oval grapevine wreath, and I'm just kind of eyeballing, seeing where I want my skates to go. So I know I want to hang them more or less at this spot. And I want to have one kind of in front of the other one. So I'm using some zip ties and my staple gun. I had kind of marked where I needed to attach the zip tie. So I'm just stapling in the zip tie there. And then I do the second skate. So I'm going to use a third zip tie to just hang the skates from the wreath. And then you'll see that I'll secure in the zip ties that are attached to the skates. So here I'm just trying to work my zip ties in through the grapevine, and I'm really trying to attach them to the main branch of the zip tie. And I found that I needed to add a third zip tie to the back of one of the skates there, so I just had to lay everything down and staple that other zip tie onto the skates. And I'm just hanging everything back on to this little wreath hanger so I can start adding my greenery. Oh, here I'm just securing in that last zip tie with some pliers so everything's nice and secure. So here I'm just seeing how the skates are gonna hang, and in the end I did glue the skates together, so I used a combination of E6000 and hot glue just to permanently glue the skates together so they wouldn't move around. So finally I'm going to add greenery. I used a hot glue gun to add glue to my stems there, and I'm starting with some long needle pine, and you can find this pine at Hobby Lobby in their Christmas section. So I'm just making sure that it's attached well. Since this long needle pine was a little bit longer, I think I used some zip ties to secure it onto the grapevine as well. Here I'm adding some pine going the opposite way. So where those two pine stems meet, that will be my transition point. So basically the greenery at that point will go one way and then the other way. And I will add a bow there at my transition point. So I'm going to go in with this cedar pick. It's like a glittery cedar. I believe I got this from Michael's, but you can get greenery, similar greenery anywhere really. So again, I'm going in with my hot glue. Oh, I'm just hot gluing the little branches onto the main branch of that stem because they kind of just pull out. So I want to secure them onto the stem before I add them to the wreath. So here I've added the hot glue to the stem and I'm just adding it to the grapevine. And I just keep adding more greenery as I go along. So here I'm just pausing on working on my wreath to make a bow. I'm using this plaid ribbon I got from Sam's Club. And I'm using a bow maker. It's very similar to an easy bow maker. And it's got the inches marked on either side of those two dowels there so I can make my loops even. I believe I made 6-inch loops and I made 4 loops. So when you make your loop and go back to the middle, you cinch the middle and you twist. So then the other loop will end up on the right side of the ribbon. So I'm just measuring, I cinch and twist. And then the last loop here, I cinch. And I'm not twisting because this is the last loop and I'm just going to make a tail now. So it's on the right side of my ribbon. And I'm going to cut a pretty long tail here because I want to make like a little cascading tail on my wreath. So I'm going to use a floral wire to tie off my bow. So you probably can't see it, but I've got the floral wire there in my hand. So I wrap it around the middle of the bow and then twist it around. I twist it pretty tight to tighten the middle because I don't want my bow to fall apart, and also I think when you have a tight middle then that just makes your loops really fluff out. So I'm just using some needle nose pliers to tighten that wire, and I will use that wire to add to the grapevine wreath. So I'll just work those 2 loose ends through the grapevine and I will tie it off on the back of the wreath. So here I'm just cutting some dovetails on the ends of my tails. So I didn't get to film myself adding the bow, but I just worked it through the grapevine, tied off those tails on the back, and then I added that little zip tie there at the end of my little cascade or the little waterfall. So now I'm taking some brown floral wire and I'm going to add the wire to this pine cone. I'm going to make like a little pick. So I just work the wire through the pine cone, like around the little nubs of the pine cone. And then I just twist the wire. So I'm just twisting the wire, making like a little pick with that wire. And then I can add hot glue and poke it into the grapevine. So I'm going to add that pine cone to the middle of my bow. I like adding things to the middle of the bow just to make the bow look more incorporated into the design. So it's not just like a bow sitting there on top of the greenery. I like it more incorporated. So I added the pine cone and then I'm just fluffing up the loops again. Here I've already made another little pine cone pick and I'm going to work those wires through the grapevine at that little sort of transition point of my tail. And once I get the wires through the grapevine, then I can twist them on to secure the pine cone onto the wreath. So here I'm pointing out that I added a third pine cone, and I'm going to add these iced berries to the wreath as a finishing touch. I'm adding the hot glue there to the stem, and then I work it into the grapevine. And stay tuned for the very end of the video where I show you how this beautiful wreath turned out. And I'd like to thank you for watching. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you subscribe to my channel. See you next time, friends.